Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, this is Carol Santella. Welcome to the show. Having suffered an unbelievable amount of loss over my lifetime, especially in the last 12 years, and thinking about the reality of how many of us have as well suffered loss, and that not all loss has to do with death, but can also be from a debilitating illness or work, friendships, relationships, income. I mean, the list can go on. One of the worst losses, however, has to be the loss or death of a child. Being a surviving parent, I can't even imagine. So what do we really do about loss, and how do we really deal with it, get past it, and function again and heal? About a month or so ago, I had the pleasure of meeting a wonderful woman who you all will be engaged with shortly. Her name is Elizabeth Allen. And Elizabeth will be talking with us today on the topic of healing from grief after the loss of a loved one. Elizabeth is married and has 8 wonderful children, 7 who are living. Sadly, in July of 2010, just gave me the chills, Elizabeth suffered the sudden and unexpected death of her youngest son, Jesse, from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a hereditary heart condition. Both she and her family, having experienced that great loss in the grieving process, have learned a great deal about the effects of deep grief and loss. Elizabeth wants to talk with us today on the ways that profound grief affects us, from the not knowing what to say when someone we know suffers a loss to the awkwardness and at times avoidance. In addition, sharing insights in healing processes along with interesting and effective healing therapies and techniques, such as a healing system known as BodyTalk. Elizabeth is also writing a book to give hope and healing to those who've experienced loss. And with that, I extend a very heartfelt welcome to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Carol. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And before we get into the actual full conversation, I'd just like to extend for myself and our listeners deepest sympathies on the loss of your son, and a thank you for wanting to share and help us with all the ways to deal with grief and loss.
Thank you, Carol. That means so much.
Absolutely. So now the majority of us have sadly experienced loss. It's across the board, I imagine. And it's never easy regardless of the situation. So the loss of a child has to be absolutely extreme. Can you begin today by sharing with us your story?
Yes. It was actually our daughter. She's our 4th child, Glenna, who was, she wasn't diagnosed for a while. She was actually living with my sister out in Connecticut when extreme symptoms, they had to call the paramedics, and the paramedics couldn't bring her around, and so that started a process of testing out there in Connecticut. And they did a lot of different testing, but they didn't do any imaging, and they sent her test results to Columbia University even, and they were baffled. They said, she had the EKG of a 90-year-old man who'd had several heart attacks, and they were just at a loss and baffled. And so what we found out is that there wasn't a lot, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or HCM for short. There are a lot of doctors who are not very familiar with this condition. And so it was when we brought her back home that our cardiologist here in Utah, did the tests that were required to diagnose it. And he then told us, he said, you need to get your whole family tested. This is hereditary. And so at that point we found out that my husband had it, and that my 2 youngest sons, so Jesse is the youngest, and then my son Stefan also has it. So it was a pretty big blow, but we didn't, you just don't think that it's going to happen to you.
What is it exactly?
So the heart muscle gets too thick, and then the fibers are kind of scrambled, so they don't. What can happen is the muscle will go into the heart will go into the spasm. Mm-hmm. And so you've probably heard of the otherwise healthy, teenage athlete who makes the winning basketball shot and then collapses on the floor and dies. And it's sometimes it's known as the life snatcher, but they don't do testing for it as far as athletics go here in America, which is
So are there a lot of families that have, a lot of incidences of that? Is that a common condition?
Well, you hear of it, it's not real often, but it's, you do hear those stories. And in fact, we had a neighbor, I think probably it is more common than people realize. Mm-hmm. But I think they're starting to be more information about it. So
how does that make you feel as a parent? I mean, your husband and yourself. I mean, there have to be thoughts or issues that, because that's more than one child.
Yes.
I mean, is that scary for your kids too, or?
Oh, very frightening. In fact, it was hard to go to the doctor after Jesse had passed away, and the doctor said, well, now that you've had a death in your family, the rest of you can get the help you need, meaning an ICD, which is an intracardiac device. So it's a pacemaker and defibrillator. And the defibrillator, what that does is it shocks the heart if it stops. And so when someone with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, if the heart stops, then it gives it that shock, the same way that someone would get paddled, and it helps get the heart beating again. And so Jesse should have had an ICD, but anyway, his cardiologist kind of messed up on that. So
yet again, another issue to make you think about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We learned a lot going through just our whole process, and I hope to help other parents avoid some of the pitfalls that that we discovered through our experiences.
Is there anything that they could look for?
Yeah, the basic scan or test that would need to be done to identify HCM is an echocardiogram. So it's basically a sonogram of the heart, and then they measure the thickness of the walls, of the heart.
Were there any symptoms that your kids were seeing before that would even lead you to? Because most parents wouldn't think about just taking a child in for a cardiogram.
I know. Yeah, Stefan, he had a lot of symptoms, and he still does. He didn't feel well, and when he was tested, his heart rate was so slow the doctor was shocked. He was like, do you get dizzy? Do you faint? Because his heart rate was so slow, and so that when he first got his ICD, the pacemaker worked, quite a bit, and after it got his heart trained on the proper rate to beat, then it didn't need to work so much. But yeah, his heart actually went through some retraining after he got his ICD.
Wow.
So, and my husband and my daughter and my son, they all have ICDs now, so that's kind of reassuring, but it's still, there's no cure for HCM, so you do your best to work with it. There are medications that they take to help relax the heart, because the heart, they just try to relax the heart. And my kids were told no team sports, no weightlifting. So there are certain things that aggravate the condition, and so you want to avoid doing those things, of course.
And that's obviously a lifelong situation where it's not like a surgery can correct anything, or you have medication and just that device.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking to us about wanting to share the effects and how to really deal with deep loss and grief. And so can you start explaining a little bit what you wanted to share about that?
Mm-hmm.
Side effects and all that? Okay.
Yeah, when, and with Jesse, we knew he had the condition, but he loved his life. And he took weightlifting even though he wasn't supposed to. And so, and he was actually out in Roosevelt. He was a couple hours away. He was with some friends out there, and so when he collapsed, there was no warning. He just when he passed away, he was just gone. There were no goodbyes, and so it was quite a shock because he hadn't complained. Even though he'd been having some troubles, I didn't know about it, and afterwards, my other kids, they talked about how he passed away July 7th, and on July 3rd, they were just playing and having a fun time celebrating the 4th, and he was having trouble that day. But again, they didn't really think anything about it, and I don't even know if Jesse thought anything about it. I think sometimes, especially young people, think they're invincible. And anyway, so I had no idea the physical toll that it would take, and then what it does to the brain. Your short-term memory was gone, and so then I just felt crazy because just the simple everyday things I just couldn't remember, and my memory was affected for quite a while. I mean, and how long? It's one of those things that it changes you. It changes you for the rest of your life, and it's something that's not going to go away. People tend to have the idea, get over it, and it's not one of those things that you get over. You can physically start to heal, and even emotionally start to heal if you have the help. I know people who haven't had the help, and they just stay stuck. Some parents stay stuck in that grief for the rest of their lives, which is tragic.
Well, any death is really hard, even when you see like an ailing parent or something. But unexpected, or whether it's an accident or whatever, but that had to be horrible because, well, the one thing I could say from what you just said is, thank God he sounded like he lived his life to the full. He didn't let it. Like, yeah, he's still doing sports. I'm happy to hear that. At least it just had, even for your other children, it had to be horrible to suddenly lose a brother, and just, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was pretty terrifying for them. And then they were like, well, what does this mean for me? Am I going to die? And because of just the stress of the loss and then the paranoia, we were in the emergency room quite a number of times after his death, just with my husband and my son Stefan, and just some other of my kids. Not all of them have been tested. There's Glenna did get the genetic testing done, and so we know what gene to test for, because there's more than one gene for the condition. And so at least that's been a blessing, because the others can get tested, and so far the two that have been tested, they have the gene but they don't have the disease. So for them it's a matter of they just have to have checkups once every year or so, and just make sure that everything's okay.
How did your husband go through, because obviously it's not like, is it something that you're born with? Because how did he go through his whole life and then find out it?
So he was, again, with him, I think he just instinctively knew not to push himself too hard. And because he always, people used to accuse him of being lazy, but I think he just didn't feel well, and he just couldn't push himself, or didn't try to push himself. And so I think that's, after he got diagnosed, then it started making sense. It's like, oh, no wonder I haven't felt well my whole life. So,
thank God he got through it as many years without knowing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and Jesse was worse. The doctor, his cardiologist, from the testing that she did do, she knew that Jesse was worse. So we did know that he was worse.
Well, I'm saying, too, and I guess we'll get into some of the healing that you actually did, but I see that you have an extensive background, too, in various complementary healthcare modalities like midwifery and iridology, therapeutic touch and herbology, visceral manipulation. You had 4 years of focus on lymphatic therapy and studied psychology and social work. But to top that off, you also served as a first responder. So that's pretty amazing. Were there, I guess, out of all of those, were there certain fields of study that helped you with this whole process?
The modality, well, the system, because it's actually a system that has helped the most, is BodyTalk. And the thing that I love about BodyTalk so much is that it can incorporate all of the other things that I know and do. And so, just because of that alone, it is very powerful. So it'll pull in the lymph work that I do, or the brain work, or any of the other modalities, and weave it all together in the perfect healing tapestry that the person that I'm working with needs. And the latest, cutting edge work that we do with BodyTalk is epigenetic work, which is perfect because it's really helped to address the heart condition that my family has. In fact, my daughter Glenna, for her having this heart condition, to have a child was, pretty scary. And so they even tried, doing in vitro to, so they could select an embryo that didn't have the gene, but both of those failed. And so they just decided to just trust and just try it on their own. And so now they have a beautiful little boy. And I think that she actually, having the child actually has helped her heart to heal. Anyway, she's doing better and feeling better. So we're really happy about that.
Absolutely. Can you explain a little bit about what BodyTalk is for people, the listeners that don't know?
Sure. BodyTalk is a system that allows me or, any practitioner who uses BodyTalk to communicate with the innate wisdom of the person that I'm working with to identify physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, whatever factors are compromised in balance and communication. It helps to synchronize the body and reconnect it to its natural healing ability. And we just use a really simple bioenergetic feedback process to identify, we ask yes and no questions to identify the priority. We always work with priority. And then we just use a simple tapping method to help the brain, bring attention to what the problem is and to fix it. And then we store all those changes through just tapping over the heart complex. And now we actually tap over the gut brain or the enteric brain as well. So it's a simple but very powerful process.
And basically you're talking biofeedback would be like a muscle testing for, since people can't
kind of.
describe it.
The thing that I really love about the bioenergetic feedback we use in BodyTalk is it doesn't wear out the person's arm. The person's body gives the resistance, and so they don't. With kinesiology, which is muscle strength testing, a person's arm can get pretty tired in those sessions.
Okay, so in the way you just described it, then it's just. You can use that obviously then on somebody that's sleeping?
Yeah.
Comatose, or?
Yes, yep. You can even, I can test people who are asleep. In fact, oftentimes, I call it going deep. When people are doing really deep subconscious work, they'll go into kind of an altered, it's like they're asleep, but it's a different level of consciousness. And yeah, when they're doing some deep subconscious work, it's kind of like they're asleep. They look like they're asleep, but I can still easily do the testing.
Okay, so since I'm familiar with that, but if the listeners probably don't have an idea, we're not talking about what they may have seen about an arm extended, because you actually can just use the wrist or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, usually they just have their hand resting on their belly or by their side, and then I just gently. It's just very, very light pressure. Just feel the resistance through usually I have my finger on their wrist, feeling for the resistance.
Okay, and BodyTalk can be used with any other therapy, correct? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, it'll take me into brain work, or a lot of times I'll even have flower essences come up, and it's very consciousness based. So we work with belief systems because our emotions and belief systems are such a big part of what can block us from healing.
Absolutely. So was the BodyTalk that was the most effective in healing for the grief and the loss?
Oh yes, there's one of the techniques that is so powerful in BodyTalk is called active memory, which specifically addresses emotions that are stuck and trapped in the body, and it helps to get those emotions out of the body because it takes so much energy when we store emotions in our body.
How would that? Can you describe that a little bit better? Like how that would come up, or does it? I know the BodyTalk does priority and sequencing of care. So in order to best explain that, it would be obviously that someone God forbid, could come into a session and have cancer, but the body's going to say, well, you have to connect or balance out the liver or whatever it might be before you actually get to that, because it's just like in the process of healing a cut. The body's going to do what it needs to do in order to reach homeostasis. So in this, what you just described as active memory, if you could help the listeners understand what
okay, so active memory is using the eyes. If they're familiar with rapid eye technology or EMDR, we're using the eyes to access places in the body mind, through the brain where emotions are stored, and so then it's a process of tapping. And that focus. When we tap with focus, what they discovered through testing is that the brain goes into massive activity to go correct and fix the problem. And so we help to identify an issue, whether it's a belief system or an event. It could be something like rape that is addressed, or it could be a fear or phobia. And so anything like that can be addressed. And then we have a process of rolling the eyes and tapping. And so it's very simple. With some therapies, one of the things that that made me seek out and help me find BodyTalk is some of the therapies I saw were re-traumatizing, and it just didn't feel right to me. I thought there's got to be some better way to help heal than dragging people back through their traumas, because active memory does not drag you back through your trauma. In fact, I really like what John Veltheim, the founder of BodyTalk, says. He says, when you're going to throw out your trash, you don't empty it out on the floor and go, oh, do you remember this banana peel? And you just, you grab your trash and you throw it out. And that's what we do with BodyTalk. We get those emotions, we identify whatever it is. Sometimes the emotion comes up. If it does come up naturally on its own, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Which is very nice. And did you use that for your children during all of this healing? BodyTalk in general.
Yeah. Not as much as I would have liked to. A lot of them were out of the home, but I had it done on myself. And so with my kids, when they were here, especially right afterwards, I just did a lot of, I used oils and I talked to them, and I'm sure I did some tapping, but not as many official sessions as I would have liked to do. It's kind of like the carpenter's wife needs work on their house the most.
Exactly.
Anyway, sometimes I don't work on my own family as much. Well, and it's actually good to have other practitioners work on your kids, and I'm sure that we did do that. That I had proxy work done on my family through. I have other Body Talker friends that we get together and we work on each other's families. So I'm sure we did do that quite a bit.
Well, that term about physician. Heal thyself, it should really be done. Heal thyself.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, yourself. And when you said that, you mentioned, or I mentioned for you, that about writing the book, so was writing therapeutic for you?
Oh, very much. In fact, I did. I wrote a lot of poetry immediately after Jesse passed away, and then currently I'm writing my book, The Light of Jesse. So that has been a whole adventure in itself.
Have you been a writer for long? I mean, you said poetry too. I wasn't aware of that.
I probably started writing poetry about 5 years ago. No, actually more. It's been more like 7 years, because it was before Jesse passed away. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I started writing poetry. And then after when Jesse passed away, I wrote a lot. I probably wrote about 50 poems. So maybe I'll put together a book of poetry.
Put a book together of your poetry.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Is it on different subjects?
That poetry is mostly just on grieving. Like one of my favorite poems that I wrote was called "If Even a Sparrow," And I mean, what I found in my writing, writing the poetry, is that it would always, go through all the grief and those difficult emotions, but it would always end up with hope in, because I do have a strong belief in God, and my faith has, really been helpful to me in going through this process. I don't know how people who don't have faith can do it, but anyway, so for me there was definitely that connection to my faith that would come.
Important for me too, yeah.
That would come through.
So would you say that you specialize in grief now, grief and loss?
I still have a wide variety of, people come to me for a lot of different things, but I'll tell you what, I learned so much about grief that I didn't know before, and just how it affects a person physically and the emotions, and the things that people say that, because I was in the boat where, if someone had a loss like that, I didn't really know what to say. I've been there. I know how that feels. Mm-hmm. And so just for someone to just acknowledge my feelings and to be in a space that they could, let me talk about my son. A parent who's lost a child, it is such a gift to be able to talk about their child, because all that they have, physically is, they have their memories and their love. And so it's a gift to be able to remember and share those memories.
So you're saying that one of the best things for those of, like we've all been there when we've gone to funeral homes or whatever, and you really don't know what to say, and everybody says they're sorry, and then... Mm-hmm. So you're saying that one of the best things to do is just let the individual talk about whoever is that passed away?
Yes, yeah, because they love having those memories and being able to share those memories.
And what about for the individual like yourself who's actually suffered the loss? What would you think now, looking back on that, would be the most helpful, maybe one or two steps to start dealing with their...
Well, I know. Because there's so much. It's such a busy time after a death, because there's the funeral to plan, and we had to find a plot and a coffin and find someone to manage all of that. There's so much to do. And we had a neighbor who came over, and she just sat down and she got out a pad and paper and pencil and just started helping us do all those plans, because frankly your brain is just not in a very good state to be able to deal with all of that, and it's a lot of decisions, and it's busy, and so, and then people brought over food, of course. That's kind of the standard thing that people do know to do, which was so helpful, because you do need food, even though for a lot of people it's really hard to eat. You kind of lose your appetite and you have a hard time sleeping. It affects your sleep, and so
how are you doing now, if I may ask?
Well, for me, and I think for a lot of parents, if you can find, purpose, get reconnected to your purpose in life. And for a while after Jesse died, it was like I was living to die. Even though I still have children that I want to be here for, as they were getting older, I didn't feel like they really needed me that much. And when you lose a child, a part of you goes with them. It was like I had a foot here and a foot there, and like I was just straddling those two worlds. And so it was, so part of my purpose became helping parents avoid some of the, like I said, some of the pitfalls that we went through in our process. And then I also felt like Jesse's not here to tell his story, and so I want to tell his story. And there's MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and I think, a lot of parents, if there's, something, if their loved one's death was caused by something that becomes a cause. Like I know a woman who her son was killed because of a defect in the car that should have been recalled. It was just a simple little thing. And she got a law passed. And so sometimes, people become activists because of, so that they can prevent what took their loved one from happening to other people. Uh-huh. And so for me, pardon?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, so for me, telling Jesse's story, sharing who he was, because he was such, he was really an amazing person. He loved life, and he had a lot of wisdom, even though he was only 16 when he passed away. So I want to share, his story, since he's not here to do it, and share what I learned from, what's really important in life for me, and then just, help other parents avoid, like I said, some of the pitfalls that we went through.
Okay, that makes me think of two different things here. So I'm going to flip you both ways between the book and also some of the healing work that you do. But I was just, when people ask you how do I heal, or what do I need to heal regarding grief or physical health conditions, what do you suggest, or what do you tell them?
Yeah. Well, there are some simple things, like for people who have a pet, just what I found out after Jesse passed away is that oxytocin is very healing to the brain, because the brain is, oxytocin, which is the connecting drug, it helps to heal the brain. And so when you pet an animal, it actually helps to create oxytocin for the animal and for the person. So having an animal is helpful, having a pet to love. And so if someone doesn't have one and would, is thinking about it, I would highly recommend that. And then, of course, connecting with other people. There's a really powerful YouTube that I recommend people watch. And, I didn't mention this earlier when we talked, but it's called How to Make Stress Your Friend by Kelly McGonigal. And what they discovered is that what a person believes about stress, so if they believe that it's good, it actually is good for them. If they believe it's bad, then it actually is bad for them. And so adjusting your beliefs about stress is key. And we do that in BodyTalk, but and getting BodyTalk is like just really powerful. Doing some of the techniques in BodyTalk, simple techniques like cortices, which helps to balance the brain and get the right and left hemispheres connected, is extremely powerful. And doing switching again, which is like getting the circuit breaker turned back on so that the brain can function. So there are, simple techniques in BodyTalk, and then reach out, find a friend or somebody that you can talk with, or find a group. When I first was looking for help, there's a group called Compassionate Friends, and it took me a while because it wasn't easy to find. I went on the internet and it was like I could find nothing. But as time went on, people told me about different things, and so I found Compassionate Friends, which I think specifically deals with parents who have lost a child, but any kind of loss, a parent or any kind of loss, you could find connection in that group. And connecting with people is really important. And so finding ways to connect with others who may or may not have experienced loss is really helpful. But someone definitely who can have love and compassion for what you're going through.
That's really important, all that support.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more and more groups or forums or anything like that, because, loss is just something that's felt, sadly, in our world.
Yeah.
What was it that you said? What did you call that about the pets? Oxy what?
Oh, oxytocin is, in fact, I think it's called the cuddle hormone. So, like mothers, it's produced when mothers, have a baby and when they nurse, and so it's a powerful hormone that helps us connect to others, and that makes us want to connect. And so, when we're under stress, a lot of times the brain will produce oxytocin just naturally, which is that call to connection.
Is that oxytocin?
Yeah.
Never in all my medical, I've never seen that.
Oh.
That's really interesting. Yeah, really.
In fact, Kelly McGonigal talks about it in that YouTube that I mentioned, How to Make Stress Your Friend. It's an excellent, like I said, it's a TED Talk, and if you're familiar with TED Talks, they're only 15 to 20 minutes or so they're not very long, but it's very powerful because it helps to shift a person's belief about stress, which could save their life.
I'd like to add that to your information, so that we have that too. So
yes, yeah,
at the bottom of your actual.
Yeah, a lot of times when I teach, I have my students. I put that on for my students to watch because it is so powerful.
Very interesting. Plus, I'm a dog lover too, so I just love animals in general. I never knew that about them either. So I know about their energy and connection, but not that specific hormone.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much on that one. Okay. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about misconceptions. Are there one or two popular misconceptions with either BodyTalk or anything we've been discussing about grief and healing?
Oh, it's funny. People, they don't always understand, it's been called energy healing. And I've had people accuse me, like I was with my daughter, she was having an angiogram, and a male nurse came in, and after I was working on her, tapping on her, and after I left, he said to her, what was she doing? Is that voodoo? I'm like, seriously?
People get that, yeah.
I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
Yep.
Anyway, so, yeah, sometimes people I find that they have no conception because they don't know. They don't have a box to put it in. And so they come up with things like voodoo.
Exactly. Plus, if they're not familiar, they do kind of look at any of us that treat along those lines. Why are you tapping on my head and chest? Why are you holding that body part? It's just.
Yeah.
Anytime it's such powerful work, it's sad, especially in a conventional setting where they truly.
So I try to help people, like if they understand principles behind acupuncture or working with meridians and acupuncture points. Basically with BodyTalk, we're working with those same energies in the body, and we're helping to reestablish communication. And so I find that I do have to educate people often. So.
Well, we're always. Anybody that. I just think the whole world seems constantly educated, just because it's just good to know things and expand our lives and knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah, that's how it is. And with grief, the misconception is that a lot of people have is that it's something that you get over. Grief is not something that anybody is ever going to get over. It. I don't know what that ding is, but anyway, sorry about that. It's not something you get over. It's something that has, it's changed a person's life. And I went to a talk after Jesse died, and the man speaking, he lost his son, and he said something that really stuck with me and that I find to be true. He said, you won't ever grieve less, you just grieve less often. Because when you go to that place of grief, it is just as painful. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is.
I don't hear that on my end, though, so don't.
Oh, good. Okay, as long as you don't. Okay, so anyway, you don't grieve less often. You don't grieve less, just less often. So when you go to that place, that intense place of that grief, it's just as painful as the day that it happened. And you will never stop missing them. That person that you love so much. Grief is there because of your love, and the love doesn't go away, and so the grief doesn't go away. You miss that person. You miss being able to hug them and hear their voice and smell them. In fact,
potent the way you just said that about the, how did you word that? It's not that something that we get over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really is a misconception, because I think most of us do feel like you need to go through a process and it needs to be, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like almost like a mandatory.
Yeah.
And it really, because I mean, my mother was like my best friend and my mother, and that's a huge loss for me. So you're right. You never forget the person or the feelings or the.
No, and you don't miss.
Yeah.
You don't ever stop missing them.
Exactly.
You know, and especially on holidays and their birthday, and you know, there are those things that remind you of them that just, you know, that just pluck at those heartstrings that make you miss them in that moment.
I know there were times after my mother passed away, because we used to talk a lot too, and there were just times of the day, or even we both really like. She loved to cook, and I'd like to cook, and there would be times like I think it was almost like a year or even longer. I'd be like making something. Oh, I have to go call Mom and ask her, and then I'd be like,
yeah,
no, you can't, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those moments when it's, you know, it's just it's normal for them to be there, and you forget that they're not, and then just that memory. Yeah, it's that little stab again, or big stab again.
So do you think that there's anything that we still have more to talk about, like with the book and such? I just wanted to know, do you think that there's anything that you wanted to share about grief and loss that maybe you're thinking about putting in the book, or that you wanted to mention today that we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, the thing that because after Jesse passed away, you know, there were people having dreams, and I was just, I wanted a connection with him so desperately, and I prayed, and I was like, let me see him in my dreams. I wanted to feel him. And anyway, so and sometimes actually what happens is that deep grief actually blocks you from connecting with your loved one, which is frustrating, but anyway, it just kind of works that way. And
you think
one day
it's like a negative?
Well,
I mean, like
it just
sad, like a heavy instead of a. How do I want to word that? You know what I mean? It's like a.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's just how it is. And so if you just, sometimes people blame themselves or think something's wrong with them. So don't think that. Just realize, you know what, I miss him so much. It's just hard for him to get through. And so what Jesse did, one day I was at my office, and it wasn't too long after he'd passed away, and I ran down to the street to get something out of my car. Nobody was around me at all. And I was wearing Doc Marten sandals, so they're pretty sturdy, you know, heavy sandals. And you know how when someone steps on the back of your shoe, how it'll jerk you? Uh-huh. Well, that happened, and I stopped. I was like, in fact, it was so dramatic, it broke the strap out of my sandal. I was like, so my sandal's broken, and I'm looking around. I'm like, what was that? And then it just hit me. I went, oh. And it was like, in my mind, I could hear him saying, Mom, I'm here. So that's, he had to kind of get drastic with me to get through. and then he showed up in some photographs. I mean, it was just like the most incredible bright light. I mean, people have probably seen orb pictures or heard about them, but I mean, this was like it was like a sun in the picture. It was so, so bright. And so I want to, tell that part of my story in my book, how the ways that I did connect with Jesse. And this one, and I had a kind of a psychic woman tell me one time, she said, you're missing stuff. And I was just so frustrated. It's like, what am I missing? Don't tell me I'm missing stuff and then not tell me what I'm missing. And so I want to tell people what to look for, the songs and the radios and how they show up in pictures or show up in rainbows. They show up in rainbows a lot. I've just found out from, talking to people who have lost loved ones, a lot of times rainbows will show up like right after a funeral or, things like that. And one day I was, driving home, and it was the most incredible rainbow I've ever seen, just the colors and the intensity. And I mean, it was so compelling. I actually pulled off the freeway to stop and take pictures of this rainbow. And I've yet to see one like that. But later I was showing the pictures of the rainbow to another psychic friend, and she said, Jesse's in the rainbow. And then she showed me there's this little dot in the pictures and in the rainbow, and she said, that's him. And I went, oh my gosh, see, I wouldn't have known. I just didn't know what to look for. And so I've had, a number of experiences through psychics, and anyway, Jesse is just he's a prankster, and I'm not a person who even, I have not been a big believer in psychics, but you know what? On the other side, they'll get through to you however they can. So that's what I learned.
That's very true.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a I guess I would call her a close friend now too. Years ago, and I've actually interviewed her as well. Her name's Rebecca Traup, and she doesn't call herself. She's not really a psychic. I mean, she is. She's very, very good at that.
Mhm.
She's the most calming person that I've ever spoken with. She's just, and she does a lot of counseling. She's got a lot of, health background and stuff herself. But I've never heard someone talk about death or even life and about belief systems and stuff as that woman. She is, and she a lot, very, very, very much comes from God. But she doesn't sit and preach to you about. It's just. She's just very different. And I remember one time when you said they'll come to you in any way, this what made me think of it too.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, when I first met her, because I'm a little bit, to me, I guess over my life, especially since I was 40, I guess, my feelings on psychics are more everything to right now. If I have a feeling about something or a question about something, to me, it's directly to God or Jesus. And so I don't really see psychics any longer. I did that for a while, but not intently or anything. But when I first met her, there were a couple of us that were at a house together, and she was doing some readings. And long story short, 3 of my sisters, I think, went in before me. When I went in, they had all, my mother came to them. Okay. When I went in, she started talking to me about, do you know somebody that has, I think she said back in the day, curlers in her hair with like a little scarf over it. And I'm like, what the heck is she talking about? And then I'm thinking, what the crap? So really, what she ended up explaining to me, which was really cool, because in that one session, or that evening, my mother had in her own way, gave words of wisdoms or some kind of soothing comfort to each of my sisters. They can only do that in so many ways for so long, so they'll come up with anything they can. And really what it ended up being was the person with the curlers and the scarf over her head, that type of thing. I probably had to be like 1-2 years old, and when we were living, the place we were living in at the time, the woman who lived on the 3rd floor was actually a tenant then at the time of our family home, because we rented out the 3rd floor, and it was a large house, 4 different floors.
Wow.
And what she explained was she had to connect through her, because when we mentioned Kay, which was that woman's name, I made the connection between Kay and my mother, which then connected her to be able to talk to me about my mother, and stuff that she brought up to me after that. I knew exactly it was my mother that was talking to me.
Yes, I know.
And it was incredible. Yeah, it was just like, what?
I know.
Earth? Yeah.
I know. They have a way that lets you know that it is definitely them. In fact, a friend of mine, she had this reading done from a psychic in the UK who does artwork. And I was skeptical. I was like, oh, whatever. But let me tell you what, Jesse, he is a little stinker. He had taken my planner and hid it in my office. And so, but it took me a while. It took me like 3 or 4 days to figure out that that's what had happened. And so in this psychic reading, he's like, have you found it yet? And I'm like, what? Found what? And then, and like he bugged her. Like my friend wanted it done by my birthday, but the psychic had said, no, I can't get it done by then, which was May 29th. And she said, I can't get it done till June. Well, he bugged her and said, you have to get it done by her birthday. And so she did. And anyway, so I was there cooking Armenian garlic eggs. And as my friend is reading me this, the reading that she'd had done, he says, oh, they have eggs in heaven. I'm like, he must have known somehow that I was going to be like cooking eggs when I mean, and Armenian garlic eggs are like my family's favorite eggs. But anyway, I start cooking those eggs when she's reading that, and I'm like, okay. And then the artwork, I mean, I knew that it was from him. There were just, there were, like you said, there are just things that let you know that it was from, that person, that loved one. So
and some people are really gifted with that. Other people, I think that industry, the psychic industry I'm talking about, are really just, But there are some people, I think, that are just energetically
that have that, have that gift. So I haven't really sought out. I mean, I've bumped into psychics who have told me things, the ones that I mentioned, but they weren't. I never sought them out because that just wasn't part of my belief system. Although I do believe that there are people who have gifts, I just am skeptical about paying them or something. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I agree. Yes. So, to any listeners, if we don't mean to be offending if we're talking about psychics, but we also agree. I think it sounds mutual that there are some people that are gifted and otherwise we're not going there.
Definitely. I mean, some of my favorite. I mean, I love like The Medium and the Ghost Whisperer, and I didn't realize that the Ghost Whisperer was based after a real woman, and I actually read her book called When Ghosts Speak and learned a lot about earthbound spirits. I think she's a fascinating woman. So
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
That was a real problem.
Yeah, so I've learned a lot just even since Jesse passed away about how all of that works.
Okay, well, now that we're getting a little bit close to our time here, could I ask you maybe to share, I know we're on radio, but is there a technique that you can share about implementing anything as far as healing and grief to make the process a little easier? There's a journaling process that I really, really have found powerful in my own life. I was taught it one way, but then Spirit kind of taught me a more powerful way to do it. And so what I do is I get, when I have people do this, you can even just get 2 pieces of paper. And on the one paper, or you can get a black book and a colorful book. And I call the one journal my truth and the other lies. So light and truth, or darkness and lies. And in the darkness and lies, write down, in fact, you can write them all down, but just to begin with, just write down 10 of the most troubling thoughts that plague your mind. And you number them. So you number each one. And then you go to your truth and light journal and you write down number 1. And so you go back to that statement and then you just ask. And I kind of do it 2 ways. So I have people just think of the opposite, or what the truth is, that just comes from their own mind, and write that down. And then I have them go back and say, now ask your higher power. I believe in God, so I ask God, or, Jesus, to tell me the truth. Because what I've found is that truth is so much more profound and powerful than just the opposite. So I was taught to just write down the opposite. But if you ask, and if you don't believe in God or Jesus, ask your higher power, whatever that is to you. But, ask that higher power, whoever it is or whatever it is, to tell you the truth. And it is amazing what will come. And if you do that for every negative thought that, comes to your head pretty soon, well, and what you do is you pay attention to how it's worded. If it's an I thought, that means that you have internalized whatever it is, and you'll start recognizing the different voices. Sometimes it's a past voice from a parent or a teacher or a peer, or it could even be, if you believe in, negative spirits outside of yourself, it can be those negative spirits. So, and then you start identifying where that voice is even coming from, which is also powerful. If it's a you statement, then that tells you definitely then that statement came from somewhere outside of yourself. And so after you... Can you give me an example of one, the I and the you?
Okay, so Carol, what's a negative thought that is in your head that tends to plague you?
When you mentioned about
A lot of times it's I'm not good enough or you're stupid. It can be something like that. So you're stupid is definitely one that, people hear from outside of themselves. If you hear it as I'm stupid, then that means you've internalized it and you have now, it's deeper inside of your brain, inside of you that you're now owning that belief.
So actually when you're doing that journaling, even though it's yourself, you're not going to say I, even if it was things that you heard? Because you must believe it.
You want to write it down the way you hear it inside of your head.
That's pretty cool.
So what you're doing, so by writing it down, you're getting it outside of your head, and you're helping clear it out of your head. And so if it tries to come back, you say, like I got you out. You're in my book already. So that the dark and lies journal is like prison for all those thoughts.
That's really a cool idea. I do a lot with belief systems and stuff, but that's.
Yeah, it's really.
Write down the thoughts that they had in their head, and then just use some of the BodyTalk treatments to take care of the right and left brain to eliminate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to do that years ago. But that's very interesting. Or even the whole concept of how we look at life too seriously, and then.
And it can be about any situation. It can be about any person, because sometimes you're hearing negative stuff about other people even. So it can.
Go ahead.
So it can be anything. It can be about anything, anyone.
Yeah, what I was starting to say before was when earlier in the conversation you said something about stress and how we view that, and I'm thinking I've been under a really high stress for quite some time, which we all know isn't healthy, but I caught myself in that too, because I was walking around saying I have to get out of this stress because stress isn't good for me, and you know what I mean? Yeah.
Watch that YouTube.
I know. Oh my goodness gracious me. Okay. Anyway, for our listeners, can you tell them what would be the best way to get a hold of you?
Yes, my cell phone is 801-361-1616, and texting is great. And I'm not wonderful about answering messages, but I do call back. If I see a number, especially with a name, I always call back. But I have a hard time listening to messages, but texts are wonderful. It's the best way. And then also email is good. I don't get to my emails as often as texts, but so my email is eallenhealth@gmail. So it's EALLEN health HEALTH @gmail.com.
Okay. Is there any social ways or not? Like Facebook?
Oh, yes, Facebook. I have my business page is Into Health on Facebook, and then it's Elizabeth Mary Allen on Facebook is my personal page.
Okay, and then you also do long-distance healing for people, or?
Yes, I do. I have an office in Provo, Utah, and then I also do distance sessions.
Great. And is that by phone, or do people have to know that you're working on them, or how do they set up?
Yeah, usually I have found that it works better to have them on the phone, and then it can be interactive. It doesn't have to be that way, but I like it better that way. And then I can, if they need to breathe or, do something, it can be more interactive that way.
Okay. And then is there anything else you'd like to share before we?
Oh, not that I can think of. There's so much I could talk about things all day long. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Carol.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you so very much, and for everyone else, the listeners here today. I know this has been very enlightening and helpful for me, as I am sure it has been for the listeners as well. And please, anybody who's experienced a loss of a child, or any loss for that matter, please reach out to any of those contact avenues for Elizabeth. And here's to what makes everybody's hearts happy and souls smile. And Elizabeth, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay. Take good care.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.